Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to another Adobe XD Masterclass. My name is Howard Pinsky, Senior XD Evangelist here at Adobe, and I hope you're all doing well on this Friday afternoon. If you are tuning in live here on Behance, let me know in the chat who you are and where you're tuning in from. We've got Bruce and Wade and Umacorn and Drew, Jack, Mick. Great to see all of you. If you're tuning in for the first time, I'd love to hear that as well. Hope you're excited for the weekend. And of course, Masterclass number 92. We're just 8 away from the big 100. If anyone has ideas for what we should do for Masterclass number 100 in just a few weeks, send me a tweet at Pinsky and I will check that out. And speaking of Twitter, hop over there. Follow me on Twitter, twitter.com/Pinsky. I did post this preview of a tutorial I'm working on. I'm working on a longer tutorial on how to create this entire landing page, which may or may not include some video as well. We'll see where that goes. But I figure while I'm working on that tutorial, let's do it live, right? Do it live. We're gonna create this landing page at least as much as we can during today's masterclass. And of course, as always, if anyone has questions for me about XD or whatever, throw it in the chat. I will love to take a peek. All right, let's go ahead and hop over to Adobe XD. And since this is primarily a landing page for the desktop, we're going to start off with a desktop preset, template, preset, whichever. 1920 by 1080, we're going to start nice and large, and Umacorn already spotted it. I did call this particular landing page Boop Motors. I love incorporating Boop into pretty much everything that I design. It's always fun. Web Donut, that's a great username, by the way. Says, looking forward to seeing this one. Me too. Although I've seen it already, but you never know. It could take a drastic turn during these classes. All right, so we're gonna get going. Now, this landing page in particular, and many landing pages these days, sometimes feature full width, beautiful imagery, or even video. We might get to video at some point. So what I want to do to start this process is place a video or place a photo. Let's start with a photo in the background, and just to kind of set the mood for this particular landing page. And it's also going to help us plan out some of the content that we're going to be placing on top of this landing page. So I'm going to grab the good old rectangle tool, shortcut key R, and drag a box across the entire artboard. And so we can see it, I'm going to just change the color like that within the Properties Inspector. Hey, Luda, great to see you as well. All right, so now that we have our rectangle in place, we need an image. So if I hop over to Finder or Explore on Windows, I do have a bunch of images that I grabbed from Adobe Stock featuring cars. And these are some great images you can find on Adobe Stock. I've got some vector graphics too, but the one I want to include, I believe, is this one right here. Possibly, no, that might not be the one. Where's the one that I included in? Of course it wouldn't be here. Is this the one? No, it looks a little bit different unless I changed it. Nope, I don't think that's the one. Of course, the one I actually want to include is not in this folder. Where did it go? Anyways, let's go ahead and just drag this image, because I don't think it's this one. I mean, we can use any of these really. But I'm going to go ahead and drag this image directly into Adobe XD. Boop. Now, if you don't have Adobe Stock credits, as Wade has just pointed out in the chat, if you go to stock.adobe.com/free, or if you're just on the Stock website, if you click on free at the top, you can search for something like car, right? And you'll have, in this case, 97,000 results. Free results for car, right? So you can use any of these in your personal or commercial projects, which is incredible, right? And these aren't, low quality images. These are really high quality images that you're free to use. Now, I will note, as I was going through the process of licensing and searching for images for cars, some of them actually, you may not find this in the free section, but some of them actually included the logo for the car on the actual car, right? And those ones in particular come up as, what's the word? There's a word for it. Basically, you can't use it in a commercial project. Editorial, that's the word I'm looking for. So some of them that do leave in the like Porsche or Mercedes or whatever it is, if that logo is there, it'll likely be tagged as editorial. So, editors and authors can use those in articles about Mercedes or Porsche or whatever it might be, right? So keep that in mind. If you do see editorial and you're working on a commercial project, you likely won't be able to use it. But you can definitely find 97,000 free results for car on Adobe Stock, which is amazing. All right, I'm going to go back to Adobe XD. And just because I don't know where that image went, I'm going to actually copy this from my other document. And whoop, that's the wrong one. And just paste it in here, just so we have the same image. No, I keep grabbing the wrong image. I'll get it eventually, I promise. There it is. All right, we got our car. All right, so what we're going to do now is we're going to start adding in some additional content on top. And we're going to run into a few problems with some of the text and some of the other information that we're going to want included. But we will find solutions for that. So the first thing, and probably the largest element of this particular landing page, is the header and the body copy that kind of sets the stage for what this product is. In this case, it's a car, and it's a made-up car in this case. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my text tool, shortcut key T, and click. And there are a lot of typefaces we can potentially use for this project. But I'm going to start just by typing out something like insanely luxurious, right? Now, obviously, we don't want to leave it at this. It's very small. It's hard to read. It's not very exciting. If you were to land on a landing page and it looked like this, probably wouldn't buy anything, right? So the first thing I want to do is I want to increase the size of this. And there's two ways you can do that. You can either, if it's point text or fixed width, you can go ahead and grab this handle at the bottom and drag it on up. Now in this particular case, what we might want to do is have this text kind of sit on two lines. So in that case, what I want to do is I can either dive in here and press return to bump it down, or I can switch my text over to auto height, which is over to the right within the properties inspector. And when I do that, that'll give me these handles on the sides, so I can pull this inwards to set exactly the width that I want. So that as I do get to the end, if I did want to add something else, right, it's automatically bumped down to the last one. Web Donut says, the last thing you want is a cease and desist letter from some big company. Always avoid the logos if using free assets. I completely agree. Now, if you're working on a personal project just for, personal benefit, maybe not personal benefit, but just to help you design, then it might be okay. But definitely if you are working on a commercial project, try to avoid logos when possible. All right, so we've gone ahead and made this text larger. It still doesn't look that exciting. The color's meh, and the typeface, while Helvetica is wonderful, it doesn't really do much for this. We take a look at the word luxurious. Helvetica, very traditional, very simple. It's not really luxurious, right? So we want to switch things up a little bit. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change the color of this text to white. All of a sudden, it stands out a little bit more. But we want it to be a bit fancier. It is Fancy Friday, after all. So we want to be a bit fancier. And there are a ton of typefaces you can use. But in this case, I went through a few and I found the Buena Park JF. I don't know what JF stands for. If anyone knows, let me know. But Buena Park JF typeface from Adobe Fonts works pretty well. I'm going to just drag this out. And it's got this fun look to it. And you can definitely experiment with different typefaces. I'm going to bump up the line height a little bit, somewhere around this, or bump down, I should say. And it's just it's a slightly more luxurious typeface. Now, if you are looking for additional typefaces, fonts.adobe.com. And what's really nice about Adobe Fonts is if you go to the Browse All Fonts section, and I'm sure Wade will post the link in the chat in just a moment. Hey, Renee, great to see you. Is over on the left-hand side, you can really drill down exactly what you're looking for. And there is a luxury section, which is wonderful. And I can type out something like, right? So I can type out what I'm going to be actually typing out inside of XD so I can get a preview of what that's going to look like. And we've got these really nice typefaces. This one would probably work as well. And there's Gastromond, which is pretty nice. This would probably work as well as words are hard. English is weird, right? And someone says use Papyrus. Sometimes it's tempting to use Papyrus or Comic Sans. One day, maybe next April Fool's, I'll just do a complete masterclass and I'll just use Comic Sans or Papyrus. Won't say anything. I'll just use it and see what happens. It'll be fun. Renzo, first time here. Everybody in the chat, give a little clapping emoji or something for Renzo and everyone else who might be joining for the first time. All right, so we've gone ahead and set up our title. Looks luxurious, looks great. What we are noticing a little bit, and this might become more apparent when we add our body copy down below, is it's getting a little bit difficult to read because behind this text, we've got some colors going on, especially up here. It's not completely dark. So we're going to deal with that shortly. But we do want to get to that body copy. So down right below the title, we want to kind of explain what this car is, what the benefits are, so on and so forth. So if I grab the text tool, previously I just clicked, right? But in this case, I do want to define that width. So I'm going to click and drag. Now, it's probably okay in some cases to go over the subject matter, right? We have a car back here. It's relatively dark, and we're going to make it a little bit darker shortly. But I'm going to click and drag in this area here, and I can start typing. Description goes here, blah, 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 right? Now we're going to change this copy in just a second, but obviously we have a problem. This is the body copy. We don't want it this large, and we certainly don't want it this stylized. We have a nice display header at the top, which is great. But if we were to drop this down to something like 22, it looks okay. But the smaller your stylized type gets, the more difficult it becomes to read. So if I launch the preview here, again, it looks okay. But you can imagine some users might be seeing this on a much smaller display. Right now I think it's a 27-inch monitor, and I can read that. But as it gets smaller and smaller on people's smaller display, right, you're kind of seeing what's happening. Nolene, great to see you. Nice to be live in the masterclass for once. Great to see you. And Mathine, great to see you from Sri Lanka. Awesome. So, whenever you're dealing with body copy, you want to kind of dial it back. Even though we're going with a more luxurious display typeface at the top, dial it back for the body. So in this case, you might want to do something like New Order, which is, I believe, another Adobe font typeface. And it looks pretty good. It still has a little bit of style to it, but it's also a sans serif typeface, so it's a lot easier to read when it does get a bit smaller. And this one does have a bunch of different weights, so we can go with something like medium. And just to save a little bit of time, I do have some body text that I'm going to copy and paste, right? Now, obviously, we want the line height not to be that. And then possibly, we have the name of the car over here. What I might want to do is just highlight this and bold it. Now, of course, we have our Boopmobile, and I called it the Boopmobile RG. Little quick test quiz for some of you in the chat. What does the RG? Most of you probably know it, but what does the RG stand for in Boopmobile RG, right? All right, that's looking good. And then right down below this, we might want to indicate what this car starts at, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another text layer. And this time I'm just going to simply click and starting at. Now here we can, even though this is going to be a little bit larger, possibly, maybe it'll be smaller, maybe drop it down to about 20, possibly, right? Wade says, really good. It's a good guess, but it's not. Surprised no one's gotten it yet. We'll get there. Now, this one I might want to change up just a little bit. Lena says, here for the boops. Zachary, red, green. That's an interesting guess considering we have some green and red, but that is not the answer. All right, I'm going to go ahead and change it to all caps. I might want to bump up the weight a little bit. So we have starting, or maybe we'll do starting from. And then right below, we will add in how much this starts from, right? So we'll just do something like 72,520. Maybe we'll bump this up. Let's do like 58 maybe. And then I am going to bump up the weight even more so it really stands out. Nobody has gotten the answer yet, what RG stands for. I had to second guess myself. Did I? It's a feature in XD. That should help, right? I hope. All right, I'm going to start grouping some of these elements, and this is going to be the price. And I'm also going to group all of these, and this is going to be the, I'll just put header, right? And what I can do now is if I wanted to rearrange some of these elements at some point in the future, in this case I probably wouldn't because the order just makes sense. I can turn a stack on. That way I can dive in here and wait, says repeat good. I think he's trolling. There you go, Lena. Repeat grid, indeed. All right, let's go about 8 pixels in between. Bring that up a little bit. And that looks pretty good. Now, we're starting to even more radial gradient. I mean, radial gradient's not wrong. It is RG, but it is repeat grid. All right. Martin says, too rich for my... Yeah, that's a pretty hefty price, but it's a fancy, luxurious car. All right. We're starting to see a little bit of issue going on here, right? Even though we can see insanely luxurious pretty well, we can see the price pretty well. Once we start overlapping on this section over here, things are starting to be a little bit muddy, right? It's blending in a touch, and even though it's mostly readable, it's still kind of a little, right? So what we want to do, especially as we're going to be adding more elements at the top and the bottom, we want to just make sure that we have a nice dark background behind it. Now, of course, we can bring this into Photoshop and do all sorts of fun stuff, or we can simply create a gradient back there, right? So if I dive in here and select my rectangle, I can drag one out. Maybe I'll drag one out the entire width. I'll move it behind. And then over within the Properties Inspector, I'm going to pop up the fill, set it to a linear gradient, and we're going to do a little bit of a diagonal gradient. So at the bottom, we're going to move it over to the left. The top, we can probably leave it in this area here. We'll see what that looks like. But what we want to do is set both colors at black. So I'm going to just drag that down. And then the top color, we're also going to set that at black. But we obviously want to be able to see the content behind it. So we're going to grab the opacity slider on the right and drag it on down. So if we take a look, I'm going to rename this overlay. If we take a look at without the overlay and then with the overlay, all of a sudden we're kind of we're making that contrast a lot stronger. So we can very easily read all the text versus just some of the text. Now, of course, you can experiment with blend modes, soft light possibly, right? So it's still dark, but it also allows some of that color to seep back through. Whereas if I change it back to normal, it's pretty much pure black on the left-hand side, which isn't terrible. Definitely helps with contrast. But if you want just a little bit of that color to seep through, which is probably okay in this situation, you can change something like soft light, or overlay might be a little bit too vibrant. Actually, it's not bad. But I think soft light could work in this case. All right, very good. Now, down at the bottom, what we might also want to do is add in a bit of a section that highlights some features about the car. How fast it goes, how long it goes, top speed, and maybe even a button to test drive the car. So I'm going to start with a button. So let's go ahead and drag out something like this. We can adjust the size afterwards if we want to. And we really want this particular button to stand out because this will be possibly the main call to action on this page. So we want a nice, vibrant color, but we also don't want it too obnoxiously vibrant. So let's try something like, maybe this is like or a bluish purple. Some people call it blurple. It's an interesting name. I'm going to bring the saturation down just a touch. Now, one thing you might have to keep in mind, depending on the project you're working on, is very vibrant colors on a very dark background sometimes get a little bit too obnoxious. There's probably a better word for that. But if you do something like, let's say pure red, which I definitely would not recommend, right? It's very out there. Even though we have some reds over here on the right, they're not pure red. Same thing with like a pure blue, right? So I'm going to just drop it to this nice bluish purple, bring the saturation down just a little bit. So it's still a nice vibrant color. It's just not too noticeable, right? All right, Martin is saying, how is the gradient with black on both ends different than using a black fill? Oh, so Martin, that's a good question, actually. Let me hide this button. Boop. And we have our overlay, right? Let me just change this to a solid black color, right? So we have a solid black color, and let me bump up the opacity and change it to normal, right? So that is certainly one option. What you can do is just go pure black and then drop the opacity a little bit. Or if you are going in that direction, what you can do is simply set the artboard color to black and then select the image and drop the opacity, right? However, what's happening here is the entire image is darkening, right? But in this case, I think in this project, because we're really not going to have much information over on the right-hand side of this landing page, we really want to highlight that car. We want the car to remain very bright, very vibrant, and very visible. So doing it this way, or the solid overlay, which is this one here, right? It's darkening everything, including the car. Whereas if we went back to the gradient, right? We have a gradient that goes from the bottom left-hand corner to about the top middle. And with dropping the opacity of just the one at the top middle, we still have the car nice and vibrant on the right-hand side, which is more or less exactly what we want. Now, if we do decide to put more information on the right-hand side, which we might get to, we can either extend the gradient a little bit, right? Or we can add another gradient or darken. So it really depends on the project. But in this case, I definitely want this car to be nice and vibrant. Hey, Rusty, great to see you. All right, I'm going to bring that button back. And down here, what we want is we want nice visible text. So in this case, we're going to click again. And we'll do something like test drive. And we'll drop this to about maybe 32. And we will keep this at bold because this will be definitely a main call to action. And if I launch the preview, it looks a little bit large, right? Or at least the text looks a little bit large. So I can either make the button a little bit bigger, because we definitely want this to be nice and visible, or we can make the text a bit smaller, or both, I suppose, right? I'm going to center this text. That could potentially work. It might be a little bit too... All right, we're going to leave it at that. We're going to see what that looks like. I'm going to group these, call this test drive. And then over to the right, like I mentioned earlier, we may want to highlight some of the features or some of the stats or whatever you might want to call it about this car. So I'm going to grab my rectangle again and drag this over. We'll put it right around here. Actually, we'll put it here because we're going to be using stacks and padding. So now this one here, we have an interesting opportunity. Knowing that this particular section is probably going to overlap the wheel and part of the car, we can either do one of two things. We can either select the fill, drop it down to black, and then drop the opacity a little bit, which is interesting, or we can use a background blur, which is exactly what I'm going to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on background blur right at the bottom right-hand corner, just like that. And then I definitely want the blur amount all the way at 50, right? And the reason I'm doing that is because let's say, for example, let me drop this down to about, 4, so it's nice and dark. And if I put hello, right? If I put a piece of text in here and the background blur was a lot lower, something like this, which is a really nice looking blur. Don't get me wrong. But once you start adding elements on top of your background blurred objects, it starts to become more difficult to read. Whereas if I take this and bump it all the way up, it still brings in some of that color very subtly, and it still allows the text on top of it to be readable, which is what we want. All right, I'm going to place that right about there. And on top of this, we're going to start with maybe how fast to get, the 0 to 60 stat. And we could certainly continue using the new order typeface that we were using over here. Or considering it's more of like a fast stat that we're highlighting, we can potentially mix it up a little bit. Now, you definitely don't want to use too many different typefaces on a project. We're already about to jump into the third. That's probably where you want to stop. I would argue you should probably stop at 2. But you know what? We're going to have some fun today. So we're going to type out something like, let's say it gets to 0 to 60 in 2.3 seconds, right? Which is very fast. I'm going to use a typeface called 11. Now it's spelled ELVON. I believe this is also on Adobe Fonts. You can definitely check that out. And they have a few different types of weights. Actually, that didn't update. 1 second. There we go. Yeah, they have a few different types of weights. They're not your typical bold, medium, extra bold, black, that sort of thing. 2G, 0G, 1G, 3G, and 4G. It's kind of fun when typefaces do this, but it's also at the same time, I would just like to see bold, extra bold, light, whatever it might be. So we're going to go with 3G for this one. Sounds like a cell network. And then right down below, we want to indicate what this exactly is. Web Donut says, wheel spinning lottie on hover in test drive would be cool. Now that's an interesting idea. If we do have some time at the end, we're going to add in some lottie animations. I like that idea. Danielo says 72,000 seems cheap for that kind of car. That's true. We were talking earlier that it is pretty expensive, but for a car that gets 2.3 or 2.3 seconds to go to 0 to 60, decent price. All right. So that, and then miles per hour. Now we obviously don't want this that large, and we probably want to drop the weight a little bit. So I'll drop the size to about 20. And then we might want to go with something like either 1G. 0 might be too thin. Let's try 1. It's a little bit bulkier, which is nice. And I'll pop it right about there, and then make sure this is centered right around here, right? I'm going to group that, and I'll call this stat. Perfect. Now, over to the right, we want to include a few additional stats, and we can very easily do this using stacks and padding. So I'm going to select the stat like I have right now, and also the background, Command and Control G to place it into a group, and I'll call this stats. And then over within the properties inspector, we can enable stack or padding, right? Now, when you enable stack, it also enables padding, which is exactly what we want. We've got Abdukar, first live Adobe Masterclass. Great to see you, Abdukar. Thanks for joining in. So I'm going to go ahead and enable stack. And because there's only one object inside of this group, at least, one grouped object, it automatically defined it as a horizontal. So I'm going to go ahead and just dive in here and duplicate. Boop. So it's going to place another one automatically over to the right. And it also extended the background, which is exactly what we want. And if we undo for a second, we'll take a look. We can define that background right over here where the padding section is. Right now it's 68. That could do for now, at least, right? So I'll duplicate, and we'll probably have maybe 3 stats going across. We can duplicate and duplicate. And then if we dive in here, we can hold down our Shift key and adjust the padding in between each. What we can also do, if we wanted a little bit more separation, Rusty is asking, do lottie files work now? They do. So you can import lottie files natively into XD. There's also the lottie files plugin. So right here, we can just drag a lottie file. Let me actually place that outside of that group, right? And then over to the right, we can have it play automatically. We can also loop it and then press play. And there it is. Look at that. Fancy, right? All right. So again, we might want a little bit of separation between these particular stats. So I can dive in here and maybe we'll grab the line tool, draw one out, just like that. Maybe we will set the color, just drop the color a little bit. And then I can also duplicate this. And I can also use the Command and Control square bracket keys to adjust the position where that is in the stack. Or you can also do that directly in the layers panel. So the position where layers are inside of a stack is also determined by the stack order inside of the layers panel, which is kind of nice. It definitely helps organize things. So I'm going to just move this outwards a little bit. Yeah, maybe a little bit more possibly. Try about 56, see what that looks like. That looks pretty good. And we have a little bit of overlap on the right-hand side over here. And again, because we set that background blur all the way up to 50, we're getting a little bit of the color back there, but not too much. Again, let me drop that down. Right? Now in this case, we can probably get away with it because it's not overlapping too much and the text isn't really on that area. Which, I mean, it looks okay, right? But we want it to really blend in quite a bit. And if we needed to, we can always put a very subtle border on this object, but I think the background's not too important in this case. So I think we're going to leave it as is, and I might want to bump this up a little bit. Let's try. See what that looks like. Yeah, I think I might want to separate a little bit more. Let's just go crazy, right? 100, why not? All right, that could do. Now, of course, we want to dive in here and make changes. We don't want all of them to say 2.3 and 0 to 60, right? So this one might be maybe the mileage. So maybe 295 mile range, something like that, right? And then down here, maybe gets up to 175 miles per hour top speed. You know, I always love when cars advertise, you know, our car gets up to 200 miles an hour. Who in their right mind is going to be driving 200 miles an hour? Samuel, are you using the 8-pixel grid for the web? Usually I do. I mean, in some cases I have been, but in this case I'm not paying too much attention to it. Of course, that's a conversation you should definitely have with your developers. Some developers live and die by the 8-pixel grid. Some of them don't care. They go by 10 pixels or 13.5 pixels. At least I hope that's not the case, but you never know. Some developers have their own system, and that's completely fine, but definitely have that conversation with your developers, right? All right. Actually, speaking of lottie files, we can go ahead and use a lottie file. So down here at the bottom, we can imagine a world where we have this landing page, right? And of course, there is a call to action up here at the top to test drive, but there may also be more information down below that we may want our users to scroll down to see. And when you land on a page like this, there's really nothing that tells you there's something down below. Some users will just naturally start scrolling, but some of them may not know. Now, I think it was in the last masterclass, possibly, or the one before, I talked about adding little bits of information that kind of pop up from the bottom of a landing page just to give them an idea that there's something down there, right? In this case, I don't want to do that, but I do want to add a little bit of a subtle call to action that they can scroll. So if we scroll over here, we might want to do something like scroll down to meet the bootmobile, right? I'm going to left align it, and we certainly don't want to stick with this particular typeface for this. So we're going to go back to the new order typeface, and let's bring this, let's see, what should we, I think the size is okay, but I'm going to definitely bring this back up a little bit, and I might want to bold. You know what, let's change this to medium, and then I might want to bold bootmobile, right? So we could leave it at this, which looks okay, but over to the left, what we could potentially do is add a little bit of a lottie animation that just kind of shows the user that they can scroll. Even though most people know what scrolling is, let's hop over to our plugins and we'll type out something like scroll, right? And we have all these different lottie animations that we can use, but in this case, we definitely want to match the text. So we want probably a white mouse. Maybe something like this kind of looks interesting, right? So let's go ahead and drag this on. Now, I will note that because the preview image for lottie files are essentially bitmaps, right? They might look a little bit pixelated when you drag them on. Completely fine, because the actual contents are almost always vector-based. So we have this in place. And maybe around it, I might want to put a bit of a circle. And I'll set that at a border. Bump up the size a little bit. Make sure it's centered. A little bit larger, right? Something like that. And then on the actual lottie file itself, we do have it set to play automatically, but we also want it to loop so that that animation just keeps on playing. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on loop playback, and let's see what that looks like. Look at that. That's fun. It might be a little bit too much. So definitely, experiment with different lottie files to see what those look like. But I also want to make this a little bit smaller, just so it's not too obnoxious and large. I think that could work. It's nice and fun, right? Group, and this will be scroll. Perfect. Now we're almost falling into that same problem that we had earlier, and we had a discussion about whether or not we use a gradient or a straight overlay. This area down here is a little bit difficult to see, right? So the question is, do we use another gradient? Do we go back to an overlay? Do we just darken the image? What do we do? I still believe in this particular case, we want the card to be as vibrant and as visible as possible. So I'm going to do one more gradient. And maybe on this side, it's going to be slightly thinner. And we'll do maybe, in this case, instead of diagonal, we'll maybe do left to right. And again, we'll want black, and then drop the opacity. There we go. Martin is asking, is there a way to adjust the animation rate to slow it down? So with lottie files, there is not, because all the properties of the animation are built into the actual file itself. It's all a bunch of code and gibberish. And let me actually go over to Finder for a second. Let me move this over here for a moment, just in case there's top secret confidential information. So here I have a folder of a bunch of lottie files, and some of them you see a preview, but if you actually take a look at the file itself, this is it, right? So all the animation, all those properties, they're all somewhere in this gobbledygook, right? Now, there are some web applications, lottiefiles.com/editor. You can adjust some properties of those lottie files, or if you did build the lottie animation in After Effects, and of course you can take it into there, but for the most part, it's all kind of hard-coded into that gobbledygook that you saw a moment ago. All right, so we've got that. I might want to just pull this out a little bit. Where did it go? I selected the wrong one. I might want to just pull this out a little bit so it's not too harsh. And then, again, like the other one, you could potentially experiment with blend modes, but I'm pretty sure because we have so many colors back here, yeah, probably not going to work. So that could do. And we still have most of the car nice and vibrant and visible. We just have a little bit more of a gradient back there, which I could drop a little bit, just like that. All right, that looks okay. Now, sometimes on some landing pages, you also have almost a little bit of navigation. Now, not the navigation that we might have at the top, which we might get to shortly, but if there are multiple products that might be featured, you might want a very quick way to navigate between those. And you can potentially also use scroll to in the prototype mode to actually navigate between them. Probably won't have time for that, but we might want to set up that navigation. So in this case, we might want maybe a line, a very simple line like that. Maybe we'll bump up the size a little bit. And maybe to stylize it, it might be kind of fun to fade this line out. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. There are no gradients on borders, unfortunately. But what we can do is we can convert this into a path, Command and Control 8, or Object, Path, and then convert to path. You can also outline the stroke if you have to. Actually, that's what we wanted to do. Outline stroke, there we go. So that will turn that border into a fill object, and that will allow us to apply a linear gradient, which will have white on both sides and in the middle. But on the ends, we want 0% opacity and 0% opacity. So it just kind of fades out at the top and the bottom. And then we can start outlining our different products. So this one is going to be the Bootmobile. There we go. And in terms of the actual styling of this text, maybe not bold. Maybe we'll go with semi-bold. Size might be okay, right? We'll see what that looks like. I'm going to right align it. And then we might want another product, prototype GT. Now this one is not going to be the active one. We definitely want to make sure that we can differentiate between which is the active product and which is possibly another one, right? So in this case, we might want to drop the size a little bit, probably not too much, and then maybe drop the color a touch as well. You got to be careful because there's a lot of colors back there and the gradient behind it isn't that strong. So we don't want to go too much, right? Maybe we'll start with that and we'll see what that looks like. And then we might want to do, Europa S, which is another typeface. And then Futura 9000, right? Fun typeface puns. Now we want to make sure that all of these line up with each other. Now, of course, we could kind of move this around until it snaps into place. Or what we can do is we can select all of them, hold down Shift and click and click and click. And then right at the top, we have our alignment and distribution options. In this case, we want to select this one right over here, which is going to distribute all of them vertically. So it's going to look at the one at the very top, it's going to look at the one at the very bottom, and it's going to make sure that everything in between is positioned perfectly, right? You can also do the same thing horizontally as well. And then I can move this and snap that into place. That looks pretty good. And then I might want to give a little bit more of an active indicator. So right over here, I might want to enlarge this, make a little bit of a circle. That might be too large. And then possibly one more around it, which might be a bit of a border. And maybe I'll just try, ooh, that could work. Possibly, maybe, I don't know. It might work, it might not work. It's almost centered, but it's not centered. Thanks for joining, Rusty. We'll see you next time. So this is going to be the active one, which will have that extra border around the side. And then the inactive ones will be a little bit smaller, right? And then that good. I'm not loving this extra border. I might just want to go back to normal. It looks not aligned, right? But it is aligned. But look here, it doesn't look aligned. It could be a rendering issue. All right, it's probably fine. So I'm going to group these elements. Group and group. Perfect. All right. Now I'm going to make sure to place all of these into a group and just make sure that we have, maybe it's centered, or we can even stretch it out a little bit. Responsive resize does a fantastic job at spacing things out as we would expect, which is wonderful. Center it. Maybe I'll line this up as well. All right. I think we're getting there. Now, the last thing we're going to add is right at the top, we are going to add our traditional navigation. And that might have links to, see all the vehicles, maybe build your own gallery, servicing, finance, so on and so forth. So we're going to start with vehicles. And I might want to bump up the size just a little bit. I do see quite often on some landing pages built by designers who are just kind of getting into design, they'll really make these navigation links at the top very large, which in most cases is not necessary. Obviously, we want it to be large enough that you can see these navigation links, but something like 32, probably a little bit too large. In this case, I think 18 is pretty good. Renee is asking, what keys were you pressing for responsive resize? So responsive resize on this group was actually on by default, but what I was doing is I was holding down my Alt or Option key so that it was resizing in both directions. Otherwise, if I don't hold down Alt or Option, it would just resize in one direction, right? And not the band. Alrighty, let's hop back over here. So we have vehicles. I'm going to change this to white. And for this one, we're going to differentiate between the active page and inactive pages, mostly by the weight of the actual text. And we'll get to that in just a moment. So this one eventually might be bold, and then the inactive might be medium. So we'll start with medium. And for links, I absolutely love using stacks, just like we did earlier with these stats at the bottom. So if I grab this one, place it into a group, I'm going to call this links, and I'm going to turn on a stack inside of the properties inspector. And we might have maybe 5 links. So I'll just duplicate, 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 and duplicate. And I can dive in here and maybe this will be build. And you're noticing the links are automatically resizing, which is wonderful. And it's based on the alignment of your text. So if I wanted maybe centered, right? I should probably center all of these. And this might be gallery, service, and maybe financing. All right. And then I'm definitely going to want these to be nice and spaced out. Having them so close together, not going to work. So we're just going to dive in here and space those out really nicely. And like I mentioned, we definitely want to make changes to the active page in some capacity. Sometimes you might make it a different color, sometimes weights. In this case, we're going to bump the weight to about bold. And in some cases, you can also combine it with maybe an active indicator. So we might maybe below, just grab a line, draw one out. And there's so many different ways you can style something like this. We'll do something like that. Maybe we'll bring this in a little bit just to give it a bit of style. That looks pretty good. And I'll group all of this, call this nav. If I can spell it correctly, there we go. And make sure this is centered on the page. Now again, right, we're kind of running into the same problem we ran into earlier, where in some locations, everything's nice and legible, right? But in other locations, not so much. So let's talk again. Do we want to put another gradient back there? Do we want to just darken everything? All of this are conversations you need to have with yourself. Sure, talk to yourself, other designers, and also developers, right? And what's nice is, if we did decide to add another gradient over here, there's a lot of gradients, right? If we added another gradient here, linear gradient, black, and then black, darken, put it behind. Maybe I'll stretch it out a little bit, or we can use, blending modes and things like that. We can actually select all the gradients. So we can select this overlay back here. Basically everything at the bottom of our layers panel, we can export that as one image. So the developers, when you do hand this off, they don't have to go through and add these gradients manually, right? They could certainly do that with CSS, but if you just want to include that in the images, you can do that. Now, I will note that depending on the size of a user's monitor, things will shift, right? So it may not be the best idea. A lot of things may not be the best idea. So definitely talk with your developers, talk with everybody, and make sure that things are working well. Someone is asking, Total Newbie in XD, is it only for mockups or can it generate HTML, CSS, and JavaScript? So definitely can't generate JavaScript, but there are a bunch of plugins that will export HTML. So you can export fully functioning websites for the most part. And there are some, if you use design specs and you share for development, there is some CSS you can definitely grab. And you can also, in some cases, let me grab this object here, SVG code as well, right? So there are a lot of different ways you can do it. It's not like a Webflow type of thing where it's going to export a fully functioning website by default, but some plugins will definitely help you get there. All right, so we have let me actually just space this out a little bit more, right? And then we might want 2 more things. Maybe on the right-hand side, we might want a way to search and maybe a profile icon. So if I hop over to, let me actually go to our plugins one more time and our icons for design plugin. We'll search for something like user. And this one looks pretty nice. Change that to white. They're all vector-based, which is wonderful. And then we might also want maybe a search icon. So we're going to search for search. And the feather icon is pretty nice. We can change that to white as well. Make sure it's approximately the same size. Of course, you can use guides to help you out if you want to make sure that things are perfect. Or of course, over to the right-hand side, you can enter exact values to help you as well. Sometimes with border-based icons like this one, depending on where the border is placed, whether it's on the outside or inside or on the center, it won't snap perfectly to the grid, as you can see here, right? This one's on the center, so the actual bounds of the object are a little bit further in. But if you put it on the inside, right, you have a little bit more of an accurate snap, just like that, right? All right, and I'll put this over to the side, and this is another area where we can definitely use a stack icons, and then we're going to turn a stack on. We will line this up to the right-hand side. Looks a little bit small, but it's not bad. We definitely don't want these particular icons to be too large because they're definitely secondary information. We're going to snap this over here. So I think that could work. And then finally, over to the very far left-hand. Actually, you know what? We'll get to the logo in just a moment. I did mention at the very beginning, we may decide at some point to include a video in the background instead of a photo. So let's do that. Let me hide all the overlays. I'm actually going to group the overlays. I'm going to hide that. Now, what you're going to notice is if I go to Finder and I go to a folder that contains some videos and I try to drag the video onto this photo, it's not going to allow me to place it into the photo. And that's because it's already a masked object. There's essentially already an image masked inside of this rectangle, right? So what we want to do is we can either just change the color of this particular image to remove the image, right? But I want to keep it there. Or we can create another rectangle, place it behind, and then boop, pop that in there, right? Of course, you can just drag the video directly onto the canvas and then move it, but I like masking things. It makes it a little bit easier. Now, what we want to do is we want to make sure that when we start the video or start the prototype, the video plays back automatically. So we're going to select the video inside of the layers panel, and then over within the properties inspector, we're going to play automatically. Now, you do have additional options. You can pop open this heads-up display. You can set a thumbnail. So if the video does not play automatically, you can choose an image that will display until the video plays. You can scrub the video, right? Just like that. You can crop the video. Sorry, not crop. You can trim the video, or you can also have it loop playback, right? Now I'm going to activate the overlays one more time so everything is kind of nice and dark. And then if I play it, ooh, look at that. We've got a video. Now, of course, now that we've replaced the image with a video, we may notice some areas where we need more overlays, but everything kind of looks pretty good in this case. And it's just amazing what a video can do to kind of bring life to a landing page. It's kind of fun, right? This is a shorter video that I trimmed, but I also have a longer one that we can potentially use as well, which is right here. I think this was a longer one. And by the way, if anyone has been using videos in XD, one of the latest updates, we did bump up the file size to 20 megabytes, which was up from 15. So here's another example, right? All right, looks pretty good. I'm actually going to go back to the image for now, which I have right here, and then we're going to wrap things up with our logo, which is going to be called Boop Motors. Now, for this one, we're going to use a bit of a different typeface, which is totally fine for a logo because that will probably be exported as something like an SVG or PNG anyway. So we're going to type out Boop, and we're going to use maybe the House of Cards typeface, which is kind of fun. And we're going to bump this up to maybe 56. Not 568, not good. There we go. Boop, and then right down below, we might want to put the word motors. And this will be much smaller. So it kind of fits right in there. Oops. Something like that. And in the example that I showed on Twitter, I actually replaced the O's with wheels for tires, which I thought was a kind of fun idea. And then I also converted this into a path, and then I just brought down the bottom of the P, right? And let me actually just grab this logo from this other document and boop, pop it into place. So you can kind of see what I did here. I used the same typeface, but I got rid of the O's replaced them with wheels, which was interesting. And then I just brought this down. So I essentially just converted this into a path, brought that down a little bit so it lined up with motors, and then just very subtly adjusted the path so that the curve was nice and curvy, right? Just like that. Kind of fancy. Thought it was kind of clever. All right. And Renzo says 20 videos max for a project. Yes, videos get very large in file size. So there got to be a limit somewhere. But of course, like when we introduced video to begin with, we're keeping an eye on performance and that sort of thing. So if we can safely increase that file size and max video limit again, we might do that. We'll see. Anyways, that's going to wrap things up for me for today. Kyle T. Webster is coming up in just a few moments, so stick around for that. Big thank you to everyone who has tuned in, and I will see you all next week.